All right, fellow coder, welcome to this next lesson in our series where we are building a real-world web app from scratch, leveraging ReactJS on the front end and a Spring Boot web server on the back end, and how to mesh them together. So in this episode, we're going to be diving into the complexities of using state in React versus using local storage state, and how to best use those things. So specifically in the context of storing a JSON web token. So if that sounds like it is of interest to you, stick around. Let's go. Alrighty, welcome back, fellow coder. Let's get started with this stuff. So the previous video, we were storing the JWT, the JSON Web Token, inside of our state. But the downside of that is it doesn't actually stay there. If you refresh the page, it has to refresh it again. And anytime the stuff, if you shut down your server, whatever, it loses the state. So that's not ideal. It's fine for certain use cases when you want to temporarily store something and then you don't care about it once you leave a view or something. But for the JSON Web Token, we want it to persist the whole way because the JSON Web Token represents a login, right? We've logged in, we've authenticated ourselves, and we want to stay logged in every time we navigate around the app. We don't want to have to re-log in every single time and generate a new web token every single time. We want to store it. So how do we do that? We want to use something called local storage. So local storage is something that allows us to store data in our browser for that particular website that we're on. And this is a good fit for what our needs are. We want to be able to store this this data, this JSON web token, in the browser of the thing that we've logged in with, right? So whether that's on our phone or our laptop or whatever, we want to store it in that browser because we've logged in and we want to store that. And then we don't want to lose it really ever. We want to have that stored in sticky storage, sort of, so to speak, in our browser so that the next day when we open up our browser and we go back to the same website, we'll still be logged in. So the JSON Web Token will still be accessible. So that's why local storage is very helpful. It allows us to persist data across sessions and across views of our application. It survives closing of the browser and reopening of the browser. Now, it can still be cleared. If you clear all your cookies and your history and everything, it'll clear that out and you'll have to re-log in, but that's okay. That's sort of just how the web works. So how can we leverage local storage? Well, it's quite simple. There are two, things that we can do. We can do localStorage.getItem to get something from local storage, and we can say localStorage.setItem. Set item, right? So getter and setter, just like we have up here with useState, we can do local storage get and set. However, if I did it this way, this would be a little bit boring and a little bit repetitive because we're going to have to probably do this a lot. We're going to have to get access to our local storage items in many places. And this is just, doing this is a bit verbose. It would be a bit sexier if we could sort of use something more like this notation that we have with useState. And that's where there's tons of examples on the interwebs about how you can implement your own local storage, use local storage hook or whatever. You can create your own version of the useState hook, but you can do it in your own app. So that's sort of what we're going to do today. We're going to go to source. I'm going to create a new folder and I'm going to call it util. So I'm going to create some utility classes or whatever. So I'm going to create a new file in here and we're going to call it useLocalStorage. Right. Something like that. useLocalStorage.js. So in here, we are going to create, since this is just going to be a utility type thing, we'll just declare a function in here, and we'll call this, I don't know, use, local state or something like that. Okay. This will take in a default value because we want to be able to pass in the default value just like we do with the useState. And then we're going to have a key to identify which of the local storage items we want to grab or store, right? Because this local storage can store more than just one key value pair. It can store many key value pairs and persist them for longer term use. Okay, so we'll create that function. And then we also need to be able to export that function. So in other words, we need to be able to have this publicly accessible outside of where we are now. So we can export useLocalState. Okay. That's the first thing that we do. Now we need to give behavior to useLocalState. And for transparency purposes, I am leveraging an article here called, persisting, what is it called? Persisting React state in local storage. So I'm just going to be sort of mimicking their code. It's not a lot of code. I could have just copy pasted it, but I do want to sort of walk you through how it works. So under the covers here, basically what they're doing, and I guess I can show you the code again. What they're doing is they are using the idea of useState. So it's a combination of leveraging React's useState in correlation with a local storage get item and set item. Where's set item? Here, set item. So some things to realize is when you are using local storage, everything is stored as a string. Okay, so local storage, key value, the value is a string. So when you are storing something into local storage, you need to store it as a string. And if you're storing an object, you need to stringify that object, just like we did before in a previous lesson when we were using our fetch and we're sending data along the body. When you send a fetch, like a post, and you have a body, the body has to be a string, so you can stringify an object. Same thing is going on here. So we're leveraging the useState to have a value and a getter and a setter for that value. And then we can use this sort of quote unquote sticky value to grab it from local storage. If it is not or if it is in local storage, we can then parse that value out. Otherwise, we return the default value if it doesn't exist inside of local storage. Then here, this is what we use to set it, right? So we have another hook that pays attention to the keys and values, and this useEffect hook will fire when there's a change to the key and value, and it will fire such that whenever it changes, it will update local storage. So if you pass in a new key, it will persist that key along with the value as well, and so on and so forth, right? So that is the beauty there. And then it finally returns the key and the value from up here from what is being sort of, grabbed or modified or whatnot. So that's sort of the scope of the code. So let's program that out in here. Again, we want to be able to use effect. Now, if I say use effect, it's going to leverage an import statement, which I don't know if you can do inside of the context of this. Maybe we can. I think that's why they probably said React.useEffect, because if you say React.useEffect, I think you can get away from having to import it, although it says React is not defined, so I guess you can't get away with that. So I think you have to just do the import. We'll see how it plays out. So the useEffect hook that we are going to leverage, sorry, not useEffect, sorry. We will use a useEffect. This one is useState. Okay, and that's not right. UseEffect does not come from, this should be here, useEffect. Yeah, so the useEffect that we will be using comes from React. So the useState, let me just double check that what they have. useState, the first thing it wants is a function, right? And the second thing it wants is the dependencies, which we are excluding here. There are no dependencies. So our state that we are going to use is going to leverage a few things. So the first thing is it's going to look at local storage, right? So say local storage.getItem, okay? And it's going to get item based on the key that we are passing in up here. All right, so we're passing in a key. The key could be anything. In this case, we're going to be storing a JWT, so the JWT string is going to be the key in this case. So it's going to say, hey, does the JWT key exist in local storage? Well, the first time that we run this, the first time that we leverage this, no, it does not exist. So it's going to return essentially undefined. And that's going to be returned back to some sort of, sticky value. I'd rather call it local value. Local storage value. That's a bit more descriptive because we're getting it from local storage. So basically we're going to say, hey, does this local storage value have something? Is it not equal to null, essentially? If it's not equal to null, that means it does exist in local storage, so we can parse it. Remember JSON parse, just like we did, we're going to do JSON stringify. The value in local storage is a string, okay? But we're probably wanting to work with objects here. That's the whole point of what we're going to be using local storage for, is to store objects. So we need to parse the JSON stringified string and parse it back into an object, right? So that's going to be the value. The local storage value is the string representation of an object. So we want to parse it out. And otherwise, if it does not exist, then we can return our default value. And all of this will be returned from our useState back into the arrays, the getter and setters for this array. Because remember, useState, just like we had back here, useState returns something, right? You can say on the right-hand side, you have useState, but that can equal the getter and the setter. Let me get rid of this because this is just noise right now. So useState returns back the getter and the setter, so to speak. So that's all we're doing here. This useState is returning something that we can return back into a getter and a setter, which is going to be the value and the set value, right? So to speak, right? We have a way to set the value. Cool. So now with this useState and leveraging local storage, and if we have a value from local storage, we get it and return here. If we don't, then same thing, we have a default value. That's one part of this equation. We've done sort of the get version of our equation. We have not done the what you call it, the return, the set version of this equation. So for this, the way they do it is they have a separate useEffect hook outside, which we'll be able to leverage. Again, I'm curious as to whether this is going to work for our use case here. And it's going to take a look at the key and the value. Because now the key and the value don't, because if I say key and value here, it's not going to know what I'm talking about, right? So the scope of their code is, this must be inside of, yeah, I'm mistaken. This must be inside of here. It's not. I'm looking at the code and I see that is within the scope of the use sticky state is what they call it, which I'm calling use local state. So no, definitely has to exist inside of here because key and value, key is here and value is here. You would need to be inside the scope of this function, right? This whole function is the scope. So you can't use a use effect outside of the scope of that. Cool. All right. Now, here we have our use effect for key and value. And the whole point here is when one of these things changes, we want to be able to update our local storage. I almost said localhost. So localStorage.set item is what we want to do here. Set it based on the key. And what is the value, right? The value is going to be the stringified version of our value variable here. Okay, we want to stringify it. So if there's a default value being default value because there is no key, then we're going to set that default value. Otherwise, we're going to get the actual value back. Okay, cool. And then now this whole thing, the whole useLocalState method is going to return something. It's going to return the value and the set value again. So this allows us to leverage useLocalState just like we leverage useState. And I'll show you what this looks like. Hopefully this works. We'll see if this all goes to poop if this doesn't work. So now instead of leveraging useState, I don't want to do useState. I want to use localState. Okay, so as soon as I hit enter, it imported useLocalState from useLocalStorage, right? So useLocalState is the name of my method in here, my function. Okay, so useLocalState, and how do we do it? Well, there's a default value and a key, right? So the default value is going to be empty because that is our default value for JWT, and the key is going to be JWT. So now we're no longer using state. We deleted it, so you can remove that import. And let's save it, and let's see if everything goes to poop. So we got a JWT, right? EY, blah, blah, ending in SA. So if all went well, this should now be stored in local storage. So let's have a look. Let's go to Application tab. Let's go to not session storage, but rather local storage, localhost 8080 or localhost 3000. Do we have a key called JWT? Interesting. We have a capital JWT. Not sure why that's here. I think that's old. Let me delete that. Oh, I just cleared everything. Whoops. So that clears everything. So we just lost our local storage. So let's refresh the page. It'll generate a new JWT. Boom. And there, it stores it in here, right? So it stored a string. Now, the one side effect here to this is it stored a string, and that string is not a JSON string, right? It's not an object. So I wonder if that's going to break now. So this is, it starts with EY, it ends with 4W. If I refresh the page, it should now be fetching it from local storage, not regenerating a new one. So we should still have the EY 4W value here, but it might break because it's not an object. Let's see what happens. Okay, EY, yeah, 4W. No, it generated a new one. So that is not the expected behavior that we are looking for. And I'm wondering if it's because it's storing it as a string. So we might need to modify this such that when we're stringifying, we only, how are we going to do this? So the key is here, is JWT. And since the value we are storing back here, when I say set JWT, this is not an object, so to speak. It's just a string. And I'm wondering if that's ruining everything. Because, yeah, DW is in here. If I refresh again, it changes it to another value. So clearly something is broken here. So when we say set JWT, it should be leveraging the setter method in useLocalState. useLocalState has a default value and a key. The set value is returned back here. I wonder if, so useLocalState is coming from useLocalStorage, which is great. We want that to happen. I'm wondering if there's a confusion about, I mean, this setter method must be working because we call set, right? And it then goes into useLocalState, and the set value, which is what's returned to us, represents the setter here for the useState. When we call set value in this useState, it is going to invoke the useEffect here because the value is going to change, right? Which is then going to invoke local storage set item with our key, and then our stringified version of the value. So, but then upon refreshing of the screen, the JWT value here should, when we get it, should represent the value here, which it's going to say use state of the value, and the value should be local storage. It should be not null because it's getting the item from local storage. Okay. So we could put some breakpoints in here or some console logs. So we can, we can say log, local storage value is, and then value. And then we can say, log here, updating local storage key to value. So local storage key is value. So let's do that. Console, clear the console, and then I will save. Oops. Cannot access value before initialization. Value, right. We haven't done it yet. That has to happen here. Okay, I'll try again. Okay, so local storage value is FUA. Updating local storage to FUA. JWT is FUA. Local storage value is, and then it's changed. Why does that change? Interesting. Let me refresh. So let me go here and then look at this guy, because essentially, well, this might be my fault. This might not be the fault of the local storage stuff. This might be the way I'm using local storage, right? So I should probably say in here, if we don't have a JWT already, then go get one, right? That's probably what's missing here. Let me refresh. So TW is still there. Refresh. TW. So now we're not fetching a new one. Okay. So that was the problem, right? And then if we go here to application and we blow away our JWT, now we don't have a JWT. So this one will be true and it will go and fetch one and set it in the local storage. Boom. So now our one is EG, and if I refresh, EG. Voila, ladies and gentlemen, I have fixed our problem. So our local storage code was not wrong. The local storage was behaving exactly the way it should be behaving. It was behaving because differently because we were fetching a new value and then setting that new value into local storage, right? So basically, if we already have a JWT that we fetched from localhost, which happens right here, when the program loads, when I hit F6, it's going to try and look for the value of JWT. It's going to see that we already have a value stored in local storage. It's going to fetch it, and then it's going to have it here. And then in here, it's going to say, hey, I already have a JWT, so don't fetch a new one. Cool. So that is what local storage is all about. And now we have this handy little useLocalState method that we can execute whenever we want to use something more than just useState. So now we have useState, which is built into right? Value and set value equals useState and then some default value, right? This is built into React. We can use state like this, where we have, some value here and then set some value. This is how useState works in general. And this can be used however you like with whatever type of variable you like. But just know that when you just use the useState hook, if you change to a different view or whatever, it can wipe it out. So, or when you refresh, it can wipe it out, right? So that is the side effect of this useState, which is fine if you don't actually need to store it more permanently, which is why we have introduced this useLocalState, which is our own method that we have created over here, which is just a function that we export. Okay, so beautiful. Now we have access to that and we can use it. And now going forward, that we have access to the JWT once and for all, we can now leverage that JWT in future requests to our endpoints, right? Which we'll have to build out. So I guess in the next lessons, we'll walk through that kind of stuff. Maybe we'll refactor. I don't really know where we are going to go in the future, but I'm sure it will be exciting. So please do give this video a like if you have learned something, if you've enjoyed this, and be sure to subscribe to the channel if you don't want to miss access to the next lesson when it comes out. So take care of yourselves. As always, happy learning and bye for now.